Thank you, Joe, and to the Commonwealth Club for inviting me. I'm a regular listener to the Commonwealth Club lectures. We hear them on WSKG in Ithaca, New York. They've been great over the years, and I'm honored to be in your company. I'm going to start by making a prediction. You'll, of course, don't need any warning from me to be skeptical of predictions made by economists. They've not turned out well over the years. I'll predict that if you asked economists, professional economists today, who's the intellectual father of their discipline, you'd get 998 out of 1,000 responding Adam Smith. That's the clear consensus, I think, among my contemporaries. And Smith's modern disciples would cite his celebrated invisible hand idea, the idea that if you turn selfish people loose in the marketplace and tell them, seek your own advantage, truck and barter with one another, the end result will be the best possible outcome attainable for society as a whole. That claim rings a little hollow these days. I think the invisible hand was never a claim that Adam Smith put forward in quite those terms. His modern disciples are way more enthusiastic about the invisible hand idea than he ever was. He was amazed that you could turn selfish people loose in the marketplace and sometimes get good results. And so when he stated his claim, it was always qualified in that way. Still, it's a major intellectual advance, the idea that producers would compete with one another to steal market share from their rivals with no intention of benefiting society. The end result would be competition would drive prices down, higher quality products would be introduced to appeal to rival firms' buyers, and the consumers in general would be the ultimate beneficiaries of that competitive process. They would get better products at prices just high enough to cover the costs of production. It's really quite a remarkable story, but as I noted, Adam Smith himself didn't believe that it was a general description of what happens when selfish people go about their business. It was an interesting claim about a certain subset of activity. Here's the prediction I'll make. If we asked professional economists 100 years from now, this is a nice safe prediction for me to make since I, and I guess no one else in the room will be around to test to see whether it came true, who's the intellectual father of your discipline, I'm going to predict that they would not respond by naming Adam Smith. My prediction is that a majority, maybe not 998 out of 1,000, but a majority would cite Charles Darwin as the father of modern economics. And the reason I make that prediction is that Charles Darwin had a subtly different emphasis on the effects of competition on how things develop and emerge in competitive systems. One of his central insights, in my view, is that natural selection focuses on what benefits the individual. It doesn't really care directly about what benefits the species, so a trait or a behavior is selected insofar as it promotes the reproductive interests of the individual bearing the trait. Now, of course, oftentimes the trait that helps the individual also helps the species to which the individual belongs. So if you think, for example, about a mutant gene that codes for keener eyesight in the hawk, well, the hawk who bears that gene gets a clear advantage. He can spot mice from a higher altitude soaring above the valley floor. He'll catch more mice. He'll feed his kin more fully and raise more offspring. If that gene spreads throughout the hawk population, which it would have a tendency to do, so much the better for other hawks as well. They're not any of them disadvantaged by having keener eyesight. So that's the invisible hand played out in a Darwinian setting, but as Darwin was well aware, oftentimes the traits that benefit individuals don't play out at all to the benefit of the group. And here I want to tell a simple narrative story. I've taken to altering the way I give talks in the last several years because I've in recent years been studying the lack of effectiveness of the introductory economics course. I hesitate to reveal to you that there are now studies in which students who take our course, our traditional introductory economics course, are given tests designed to probe their knowledge of basic economic principles 6 months after the course is over. And those students don't score any higher on those tests than others who never took the course at all. It's an extraordinary, shameful performance from the dismal science, you have to say. In other fields, it would be the subject of malpractice lawsuits. You have to wonder, well, why isn't it in economics? Parents are paying $40,000 a year tuition. Why hasn't someone filed suit? You mean you're spending all those hours with my kids and charging me all that money and you're not teaching them anything? My hypothesis is that we haven't seen such suits because most people out in the world don't know any economics either. And so it's not at all evident that we're sending people out who are poorly trained. Ben Bernanke and I, in our textbook, had a hypothesis about why this is so. Basically, it's a simple conjecture that we try to throw way too much stuff at students during the semester. Thousands of ideas, literally, wrapped up in equations and graphs, many of them. And really, the human mind does not absorb information in that form and in that quantity very effectively. So in the end, it's not such a surprise that it all goes by in a blur. It would be interesting if it didn't. What learning theorists teach us is that the way to get information into the human brain most naturally is to wrap it up in a narrative. So if you can take the economic principles that do most of the heavy lifting, and the good news is there's only about a half a dozen of them, and wrap them up in stories that seem to illustrate what's going on in context familiar to people, that information gets into the brain easily. It's dredged up quite easily from memory. People can see analogs to it as they go about their business in the world. And so it's a way more effective way to master new concepts. And so it's our claim, really, that you can learn the basics of economics in a semester without great difficulty, if just you will cast the information in the form in which it's most easily absorbed, and then make sure to keep coming back, drilling, and repeating often. So here's a story. This story I'll tell you is a Darwinian story, and it illustrates in very simple terms the central theme of my talk. So stay awake through this story, and then when you go out and somebody asks you, what was that about? You can say, well, I didn't hear the whole thing, but this is the gist of the talk, as he explained at the outset. So Darwin asked this question: why is it that the members of vertebrate species, most of them, are asymmetric, male versus female? The males in general in such species are bigger and generally more colorful than the females. Why is that? Darwin wanted to know. So, for example, the bull elephant seal, the male of the species, weighs upwards of 6,000 pounds. That's as much as a Lincoln Navigator weighs, a big sport utility vehicle. They're prodigious animals, 23 feet long. Is it good for males to be big? Darwin pointed out, well, no, not really. In fact, it's quite burdensome for males to be big. They get orthopedic ailments at much younger ages. They have a much more burdensome workday. They've got to eat prodigious quantities of food to maintain their body mass. Worst of all, they're not very good at escaping from predators. The great white shark can catch a 6,000-pound seal much more easily than the female of the species. The female weighs a fifth as much, 800 to 1,200 pounds. So why are males so big? Darwin's answer is quite provocative, simple, logically sound. The answer he suggested was that because, like most other vertebrates, the elephant seals are polygynous. That means the males take more than one mate if they can. You have to stress the if they can part. If some males take more than one mate, that means other males don't get any mates at all. And in Darwinian terms, that's the worst outcome imaginable. The game is over for you. Your stuff doesn't get into the next generation. So naturally, the males take very seriously the task of finding and acquiring mates. And they fight with one another for them, typically in vertebrate species. And lo and behold, if you're slightly larger than your rival that you're fighting with, you have an advantage in a fight. And so if there was a mutant gene that coded for slightly larger size, that would tend to make the bearer of the gene more likely to win the fights with other males. They're bloody, horrible fights to behold. There's footage of them available in the nature archives. They're just pummel one another for 4 or 5 hours, and then they're bloodied and exhausted. Finally, one of them lumbers away, unable to continue. The winner claims access to a harem of anywhere from 50 to 100 cows, and the gene that made him a little bigger, that helped him win, then shows up in the pups of all those cows. Then another mutation comes along and it builds on itself, and so the bulls get bigger and bigger, not without limit. They don't weigh 100,000 pounds, they weigh 6,000 pounds.